Welcome. Thanks for listening to Cherry Becker's Government and Public Sector podcast series. In each episode, we hear from the best in the business on the latest challenges, trends, and opportunities affecting the government and public sector. I'm Christian Fjellgraf, leader of Cherry Becker's Government and Public Sector industry team. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for joining us.
Hey everybody, welcome to our next grants management podcast. So this is a little special today. This is a one-off podcast we're going to do for you. And it's going to be about FEMA Public Assistance. So first of all, we just want to start by offering, expressing our heartfelt care and concern to everyone that was affected by Hurricane Helene. And we at Cherry Becker, we have coworkers, friends, and family that were impacted by the storm. And we ourselves have been very deeply affected. If you want to help those in need, there are places all over the East Coast and Mid-Atlantic areas where you can donate supplies for these folks who have lost everything. So please search them out and donate what you can. That's just a little public service announcement for all those folks out there that are really struggling right now. So we were planning on doing another podcast today, but instead we want to make sure that everyone affected out there has at least some kind of resource to use and an understanding of how to go about applying for FEMA public assistance, and even just how that works, timelines, deadlines, what happens after. So we don't want you to miss that deadline, and we want you to be successful and get those FEMA public assistance funds that your business or even individuals really need right now. So I always say, it's hard. It's hard to be in a position, and I'm sure Paula agrees. I'm going to introduce her in a second, where you can't really be there to help. We're not in those areas, but what we can do is offer to help you secure some funding to rebuild and revitalize the communities that are just been devastated by this. So I am Kat Kizior. I am a manager with Cherry Becker, been in grant management for about 25 years at this point. And we have Paula Heller with us, and she is actually the newest member of our team. Super excited to have her on board. And I'm going to let her introduce herself because she says she's not a FEMA expert, but I say she's very much the expert in FEMA from many different directions that we're going to talk about right now. So Paula, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kat, for that great introduction. I'm Paula Heller, and I'm one of your new co-hosts here, so I'm super excited. I've been dreaming of doing a podcast for years. My background is in higher education, pre-K through 12th grade education, and then I started my career as a cellular molecular biologist. All of that has had grant work, and so I have over 25 years of experience. Collectively, I also am a certified grant management specialist. So I'm not excited to talk about this topic, but I want to empower people by talking about this topic because I think it's really important that we get this information out.
Yes, awesome. So we're going to go through this. And by the way, guys, this is all impromptu. This wasn't planned, but we want to be able to get this information out to you. So Paula actually has worked with FEMA funding on several occasions, not only through her business entity, but also through her individual life, because she has been in hurricanes, she has had things destroyed, and she's been through this process before. And as we talked about how complex this process can be, and especially if you have no idea, it's like, how do I do this? How does FEMA funding work? I got this short little deadline that I have to meet. How am I going to do this? So Paula, can you just kind of talk a little bit about what you've been through before with the hurricanes, your side of how it affected you, and then how you worked with FEMA. And we'll start with that so you can get an idea, of everyone out there can get an idea of, understanding of what people are going through. And then we're going to kind of go into what you can do and what the deadlines are and how you can go about trying to get those applications in timely, because it's not just a one-step process, correct?
That is correct. So I definitely have direct personal and professional experience with FEMA. I lived in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands for the majority of my life. And I ran a pre-K through 12th grade private school there as the executive director. And in 2017, in September, we had Irma, a Category 5 hurricane, and 9 days later, we had Maria, another Category 5 hurricane. So you can imagine, islands are just like a tiny little pinprick of a dot in the ocean. So to have two Category 5 hurricanes hit back to back was not only traumatizing, it was devastating to the economy, to the infrastructure. It was really a difficult time. And I had to lean on FEMA. Like Kat said, I had to lean on FEMA to help me rebuild my business, and I had to lean on FEMA to help me fix my personal property for where I had gaps in insurance. So it's very personal to me, and I wanted to do this and be a part of this because I wish someone could have helped me navigate it when I was going through it. I didn't know what to do. I just showed up there filling out papers for me, and it's just being thrown at me left and right. And I just followed the steps that they put in front of me. But if I'd had a clearer sense of the full scope of the process of getting assistance with FEMA, I think I could have navigated better. And I probably could have leveraged it a little better. And so I think that's why this is really important to me. When you go through a hurricane, you prepare for the hurricane, you live through the hurricane, and then you live through the aftermath of the hurricane. And you've got a lot of anxiety. You're just trying to get things back up and running and back to normal as quickly as possible. And FEMA comes in as this entire extra burden of work to do. So I think I want to support people in getting there.
And what about the folks that are in the mountains? They didn't expect any of this, Florida gets hit with a hurricane. People know what to do. This was a little worse. But then you get folks up in the mountains, up in Tennessee, up in North Carolina, places just devastated by the flooding. And we realize this isn't a normal thing that happens up there. So, we want to be out there to not just help those that are like, oh yeah, we've gone through this before, we know what to do, but especially the people that have not been out there and they're like, what in the world has happened? How do we remedy this? And how is it ever going to be better? It's just heartbreaking. So Paul, let's kind of dive into the actual details of what we need to do for FEMA applications. And I think let's start with dates. So there's like a set of different dates you have to meet for the application, and you have to be quick, right?
Well, the first thing that has to happen is the president has to declare it as a disaster. And specifically, the declaration comes to a state, but it may not include all the counties within a state. So, for example, in the state of South Carolina, it's predominantly on the West Coast and kind of like a curve shape, kind of like a backwards comma shape, the counties that were impacted, and others weren't impacted at all. So the state is going to get a pile of money from the federal government based on their estimates of what they think they're going to need allocated. And then from there, that money goes from the state to the people that apply for it. So I think that's the first important piece, is to confirm that you're in a disaster zone, that the county you live in has been declared an emergency. So once you do that, you can go onto the FEMA portal and do the application, the initial application. And it's, you're going to have some documents with you. You're going to have a sense of what your damages are, a good estimate. You're going to need to just get through this kind of pre-application stage, and that is due within 30 days, the date of declaration. So that's an important piece, because we may have a disaster that happened on a Friday, but it wasn't declared into a Saturday. So that changes when that 30-day timeline is. If this event was declared a disaster on September 27th, Then 30 days when you walk through a calendar, you must have your pre-application in by October 27th. And it's October 2nd now, so time's ticking. I
Wow,
think there's also
that's tight.
something to be said about a queue where you fall in the line. When there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people applying, you want to be on the front end as much as possible. So now is the time to go ahead and get set up and get organized.
So after that 30 days, then what happens?
Okay, so you've turned in your pre-application, right? The state actually reviews it first, and they're going to treat it like the typical way that they look at the federal government looks at doing awards. So they're going to look at your risk factors. They're going to consider your eligibility, and then they're going to make a decision about whether you're eligible and report that to FEMA. FEMA then has, I think, 3 days to look at that and make a decision. You're either eligible or not eligible. If you're not eligible, then you're going to get a letter and you're going to get an explanation of why you weren't eligible. And if you're ineligible, you can come back and ask for a review of that, to re-review your eligibility. They have a very specific method. And so wait, I want to pause for a second and say, what population are we talking about? So we're talking about local governments, counties, certain nonprofits, which basically provide public services, do work in their community. So we're not talking about for-profit businesses. We're not talking about individuals in what I'm talking about. We're talking about public assistance that's going out. Individual assistance is a totally different category. It has the same timeline, but it's about getting repairs to your house. It's about getting the debris out of your yard. Whereas when we're talking about public assistance for the local, state, county, and not-for-profit community, we're talking about getting a business or a corporation, an entity back up and running.
So
So
if an individual or let's just say a for-profit company needed to look at find out what their process would be, would they just go to the FEMA website and be able to find that information there?
there are some resources on FEMA that tell you where to go. SBA is going to be your best support. They're the ones that can give you low interest loans to help you recover. But this assistance is limited in scope, and it's for organizations that do public work. So county governments, local governments, not-for-profits that have a service or a community-oriented focus.
Gotcha. So my understanding is there's different kind of fundings available or levels that you can be eligible for, and so you have the emergency work and then permanent work. Can you kind of describe what each of those are and what each of those entails?
Definitely. So the emergency work is the stuff that people are probably already doing that they can then get reimbursed for. You're clearing up debris. Maybe a window got blown out, so you're putting some plywood up in it. So emergency protective measures. Maybe a bridge has a crack in it, and so you've had to shut it down, and you have to have a patrol person there monitoring it. This debris removal and getting the emergency protective measures in place, that is eligible in the first 6 months of funding. So once you've been approved, you can start seeking reimbursement for things that you've already paid. The trick is the second piece. So you have 6 months to do your emergency work. The second piece is permanent work. So let's say a tree fell on a building. And I think that's one of the things we're going to see with this kind of flooding, that it's going to be flooding damage. We're going to see trees that fall onto structures and damage structures. And so those will need to be repaired. That second piece is not emergency work anymore. Now we're doing permanent work. We're restoring a facility, a building. We're doing some permanent work. It could be roads and bridges, water control facilities, buildings, equipment that's destroyed, utilities, parks, recreational. There's a lot of different things that are eligible for this permanent work piece. And that has 18 months to complete it. And I don't know if you've ever done a construction project, but even an 18-month construction project, particularly in a community that's just been devastated by a catastrophic event, it's hard to pull off a construction project. So be knowledgeable and know that you can ask for extensions, and there's a lot of times where you can kind of automatically ask for an extension, particularly if you've been working really closely with FEMA and they know what obstacles you're run into. So 18 months for that, which is a good lengthy period of time, but very difficult for some construction piece. That's a little bit of a separate project. You might have site visits that have to happen. Everything is really deadline driven. So for example, if they decide that they're going to do a site visit, it has to be assigned within 21 days. And then the site inspector has to go, and within 7 days, he has to complete his report. And then the manager assigned to your account then has 2 days to receive and review that report. And then they can report back to you, the applicant, and say, yes, we agree with you. We think what you plan to do with this work is the right move. And then you make your final decision about how you're going to restore whatever it is you need to restore on your property. So I think that's a great little slice of looking at just something simple like scheduling a site visit for their own engineers to come in and look at what you're proposing to do, how it's driven by a tight timeline. And so you would have to be engaged at every single point of that and fully present. And I think that's the tricky part.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things you talked about was planning. And, we don't plan, obviously, for this kind of devastation and these kind of storms to hit. So for individuals out there who are just especially dealing with this for the first time, and there's so much going on and trying to work through the damage and everything else that's going on from these storms, how do you have a suggestion or like some steps that maybe people could take that might, and it might like give them a guide as to how to start planning for this, how to get this information together within 30 days? Those of you, start as soon as possible getting these plans together. But do you have any suggestions? I'm sure that once it happened with you at the schools, you had to sit down and, have a level head and plan out how to apply for this. And, how do I get all these, the information? How do I get the data? What do I give them? What do I give FEMA?
I think you have to step back and look at like a little bit of a longer lens in this respect. So the first 30 days is a pre-application, and it's really about determining your eligibility. And it's also about you just taking like stock of what you think your ask is going to be. What do you think your need is going to be based on what you can see? If you had 20 trees and now you have 4 and you need tons of chainsaws and dumpsters and labor, and you need to rake up debris into piles and put it by the road or haul it straight to your local drop-off facility, whatever that's going to look like, the short-term emergency expenses, and then think about what kind of facility damages, and then ballpark it. And then the next thing you have to do, just in this first little 30 days, is go back and read your insurance and find out what is covered. A lot of people in the areas that were flooded didn't have flood insurance because they weren't in a flood zone. And why would you pay for something that you have a very low risk of? And so FEMA will pay 75% or more of what? So let's say you have $100,000 in damages and your insurance will cover 80%. That's great. So that 80% is $80,000. That leaves $20,000 out of pocket. But if FEMA is going to cover 75% or more of that, then FEMA is going to cover 15,000 and only 5,000 will be out of pocket. So you do need to take time to go back and read your insurance and see what is included there. So those are the steps you have to do. What are my emergency costs? What do I guess? Rough guess, the cost of repairing any buildings or anything else that's damaged around me, and what will my insurance cover? And then you've come up with your amount that you're going to ask for, what your need is. That's just your pre-application and you're done. But that's really the easiest work you'll do, because after that, you're going to go into the portal. If you're eligible, they're going to create a master workbook for you. And you're going to put all of your impacts in there, everything you can think of from a massive brainstorm of all the possible ways that you've lost revenue, that you've had damages, things that'll come to you like in the middle of the night. I didn't even think about that. Maybe FEMA would pay for this. And then you're going to work with your program manager to start organizing those into digestible chunks that'll be called projects. And so that'll happen over time, and you'll work in partnership with FEMA. So that is within the first 60 days. So we've got like little timelines. So if you get approved, within 7 days, you'll be assigned a manager. Within 7 days of that, let me just double check if it's 7 days of that. Within 21 days of that, you have to meet with them and come up with your list of everything. Then you're going to set up a rigorous meeting schedule. You're going to write a project development plan. You're going to create a timeline for grouping all of your impacts, scheduling site inspections, and getting all of your documents turned in. And you can see how 60 days into a disaster, you're already overwhelmed because there's so much to do.
And that sounds so daunting to me. I mean, that's a lot of work. That's complex that you have to do after you receive FEMA funds. So it's not an easy path, but it's a good path to go through to get you some recovery funds financing and grant funding. So let's wrap up our last few minutes here. And what I think I'd like to do is walk through just the steps, the actual physical steps you have to take to actually apply. So I know that you have to submit an SF 424, which in grant speak is a financial assistance application. But what do folks do from all right, I've decided I want to apply. Where do I find the application? Is there a portal? What do I have to do from there? And, to get my application submitted.
To that, so they've taken the concept of the SF 424 and they've embedded it in their portal because they know public entities are going to be applying for it, and they're used to the SF 424 as a means of applying for federal assistance. But when you look at the volume of individuals, they just don't speak the same language. So they've created a portal. You go in, you create a username and password, and you answer all the questions that are there, which are the same questions you would answer on a 424. And you have to do that within 30 days. End of story. Once your eligibility is determined, so the state can have as much time as it needs to review your application, vet your risk. They make the recommendation to FEMA, then FEMA has 3 days to issue an answer to you. You are either eligible or you're not. From there, the ball just starts rolling. If you're eligible, within 7 days, you'll get assigned a manager. Within 21 days from that, you will be doing what's called a recovery scoping meeting. And that's where you're set up all of those timelines and all the schedules. And you'll be filling out a survey to do your impacts. So there's a lot of steps that happen in those first 60 days or so. and they're pretty compliance driven from FEMA's side. They have benchmarks that they need internally. They've set as targets that we'll have 95% of this will be done on time, 100% of this will be done on time. So what I want to communicate to people is FEMA will be constantly contacting you. They will be emailing you, calling you, texting you, whatever means works and it's effective. They will stay on top of you because they're trying to meet their deadlines. And I think that can be really overwhelming, Kat, for people.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. And I think at least the time that this podcast is coming out, the most important thing right now is work up to that 30-day deadline and worry about the rest after you get that application in. But do everything you have to do to get that application in up front and get it in timely. And then after that, now you have an idea of what to expect. And unfortunately, like I said, it sounds pretty daunting, but it's necessary. And everyone, one of the reasons we wanted to do this podcast today is because we want to help, and there's only so many ways we can help. So I'm going to give you my email address and Paula's email address. Paula is really the person on here that's been through it and knows the most about it, but you can email either one of us if you have questions or if we can help you out at all. My email is kat.kizior@cbh.com, and Paula's is paula.heller@cbh.com. And again, we thank you guys so much. Really hope this is informative and helpful. And again, contact us if you have any information, and we will see you guys at the next podcast. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
This was Christian again. I hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to our next one. Don't forget to subscribe.